Well, welcome to the Board of Adjustment meeting. Normally we start with a Planning Commission meeting, but no agenda items, so directly to Board of Adjustment. And we'll start with the pledge to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, a little preview of what to expect tonight. Please sign in at the door if you have not already done so. There you will also find a detailed handout of the step-by-step procedure we will follow tonight if you wish to take one. Please put any electronic devices on a silent mode at this time. Also, please note that all testimony is being recorded for the record. Members of the Board of Adjustment are appointed by the County Board of Commissioners, with one member from each of the 5 commissioner districts. Land Services staff is here to assist the Board of Adjustment with its duties. The task of the Board of Adjustments is to consider requests for variances and appeals from an order, requirement, or decision made by a county zoning official in accordance with the state law and county ordinance. Each request is considered on its own merit. The burden of proving a practical difficulty rests with the applicant. If a variance is granted, it is granted to the land, not to the landowner. There is a protocol for how we will proceed tonight. For each variance request on the agenda, we will hear a staff report. We will hear testimony from the applicants, then the board will discuss and gather more information as needed. Next, I will ask if there's anyone in the audience wishing to speak to the request. I will ask each party to come to the podium, state their name and address for the record, and give their testimony. Please be as factual as possible and direct all statements and questions to me. After all testimony is complete, I will close the public hearing portion of the process. The board will then review and discuss the case in terms of our finding of fact criteria as required by Minnesota statute and county ordinance. We will have a series of votes, discuss whether conditions be made, and have a final motion to approve or deny the request based on these findings. After this final vote on your request, you may leave if you wish. So we have one item on the agenda tonight, and that is Gerald and Benita Slovic. If you'd like to come forward, all of you who wish to come forward, and pull up a chair, pull a mic up close to you because I'll be asking you to state your name. This property is located on 33863 East Shamana Drive, Motley. An after-the-fact application for a variance to continue additions onto a non-conforming structure is what is being applied for tonight. This is on Lake Shamana. It's in Scandia Township. Okay, as long as you're all seated comfortably, if you could pull up the microphone, we'll start with you, sir, and state your name and address.
Gerald Slavic, 33863 East Shamana Drive, Motley, Minnesota, 5656466.
Close enough. Thank you.
I'm Benita, but I go by Bonnie Slavic.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say the same address as him?
That's fine. Yeah.
Linda Dahlheimer, I'm 33875 East Shamana Drive, Motley.
Jim Dahlheimer, same address. 33875.
Okay, thank you very much. Are you ready with the staff report?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
So again, this is an after-the-fact variance request to expand a dwelling within the bluff and the lake setback. This is located in Section 15 of Scandia Valley Township. The ordinance references for this is Section 706.1, which requires a 75-foot setback from a general development lake, and then a 30-foot setback from the top of a bluff. And then also Section E, which describes the limitations within bluff impact zones. Here's a plat map of Scandia Valley Township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here's the variance request received from the applicant. And then here's a site drawing also provided by the applicant. And a survey. And then here's some aerial photographs of the property. And then a shot from the water. And then this was a photograph taken at the site viewing. So again, the property is in section 15 of Scandia Valley Township on Lake Chaminade. The parcel is a non-conforming single lot size. It means which means for a single lot, it needs to be at least 120 feet wide at the lake and 30,000 square feet in area. The parcel is 77.2 feet wide and 25,109 square feet. According to the assessor's records, a 768 square foot dwelling with a full basement built in 1973 is on the property. A detached garage permitted in 1999 is located behind the house, and a small shed is at the water's edge. The home and shed is located within the bluff and the setback to the lake. And then here is the survey again with some of those setbacks highlighted. And then here is an assessor's record photograph of the home and the garage. The applicant purchased the property in July 2022. In March 2023, the Land Services Department became aware of construction taking place on the home. And then this is what was taken at that time. No permitting was on file for the work, and a first notice of violation was sent. The applicant and their daughter and son-in-law, Linda and Jim Dahlheimer, attended a development review team meeting on March 27th, 2023. And then here are the notes from the development review team meeting, which was also in your packet. The Dahlheimers live next door to this property and did the construction work on the Slavic home. There was discussion about the variance the Dahlheimers received in 2021 to construct living quarters onto their non-conforming home to accommodate the Slavics. And then here are the findings from that variance request. A second notice of violation was sent on April 14th, 2023. The applicant is requesting an after-the-fact variance for 2 additions to the home within the bluff and bluff impact zone and within the setback to the lake. 3-foot 8-inch by 10 by 6-inch extension of the front porch, and then a 4 by 15 home addition. An approximate 10,135 square foot building envelope exists on the property, and here is that. Bluff standards and setbacks were adopted into the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance in 1991. The 30-foot structure setback from top of bluff within the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance is the same as what is found in Minnesota Shoreland Rule. The DNR Statement of Need and Reasonableness discusses the need for bluff setbacks, and then here's an excerpt from that. The general area is wooded with residential shoreline development, and here's a zoomed out view of the neighborhood. The impervious surface calculation, including the expansion, is 19.4%, and 25% impervious surface is allowed. And here is the calculation provided by the applicant. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals and objectives is natural resources and open spaces, goal C2, shoreland development, goal D1. The applicable Morrison County comprehensive water plan goals and objectives is the surface water goal, objective B, land use and development goal, objectives B and D. 79 notices were sent. 1 comment was received prior to the public hearing. I'll read that. This is from Mark Anderson, the area hydrologist for the DNR. The Minnesota DNR has concerns regarding this variance application. Minnesota Statute 394.27, Subdivision 7 clearly states in part, the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. This is a case where the landowner knowingly moved ahead with construction activities. The applicant stated that they were taking actions because of unusual circumstances. However, the applicant had sufficient time to close on a home, have construction plans drawn up, and start construction, while avoiding contacting the county at any point for proper permitting. The applicants were aware of the permitting requirements due to their 2021 variance application. Additionally, the applicant stated something along the lines of, "We will deal with you later," during the development review team meeting regarding the permitting requirements. Again, the applicants were well aware of the requirements and knowingly chose not to follow them. The need for this variance request is solely on circumstances created by the landowner and should not be approved. And then here are your finding of fact and decision questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Okay, also, before we start any discussion, I'd like to, for the record, state that we were all out on a viewing on Friday, the 9th at about 1 p.m. All of us up here at the table, Amy and the 5 of us. And both parties were present, and we had a very good viewing of the property and have a clear understanding of what took place. So, with that said, we normally start with the applicants. If you have anything to add to the staff report that Amy presented.
Can we have Linda and Jim?
Yeah, I'm
Go
their
ahead.
daughter. Yeah, Linda Dahlheimer. So, yeah, that didn't sound good. That couple months there, you say that we knowingly did this and we deal with this later. I want to say during that time, they were in the hospital. We were dealing with a lot of stress. It wasn't, if I could just back up, it took, my intent, our intent was always to have our parents live with us. We applied for the permit for our place. We didn't know about anything about the bluff then. That's our fault. And then we spent a year working with Amy and Shannon and revising the plans to just get my parents with me before I knew they absolutely needed to, because they lived in Rogers. And so, we spent a year working on this, and we came here, and, we're really grateful. You guys gave us that variance. You approved it. That was November 16th. The intent then from there is we created plans, we got estimates, then we were going to start in the spring, and it ended up it was going to be May 30th that we were going to start the addition. And so it was never our intent, it was never their intent to buy another place, it was always their intent to live with us. And then on May 17th, my dad fell, and it was an urgent thing, and then 3 days later, the neighbor put his house up for sale. And May 30th, we were going to start the addition. And so I talked to the neighbor, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this could be a lot quicker if we could just buy his place. But he had it on the market. We had 5 days to decide. My dad was in the hospital. My mom they had to look at this thing on FaceTime. Had it been any other house, 2 houses down, we would have never even went forward with it. It was always the intent for them to live with us. But the house right next door came up for sale. And we looked at the timing of building the addition and the garage was going to be much longer if we could then close the house. But we had 5 days to decide, because he was willing to take it off the market, because he really wanted us to have, he wanted my parents to have the house. We were neighbors. And so we did. But in the meantime, it was a very, very stressful 3 months. My dad was in and out. I didn't know if he was going to live. We had to get him here. We were going back and forth. Then we had to get their house ready and pack up their house and all that stuff. So it wasn't like there was this time that we just sat back and, Anyway, we got the house. We had to decide within that week. So then I was working with, going to the hospital, closing. We knew the bedroom was really small, but I was thinking, well, maybe we can go out into the living room or something. But again, I wasn't even at the house. We were dealing with my parents and stuff. And at the end of the day, when we got there, it was just like it wasn't going to work. And it was going to be a major thing to do I didn't even know if it was possible to go out in the living room the way the roof was. But the square footage that we've added is basically a hallway. It's 4 feet by 15, so my parents can get a wheelchair and a walker in their bedroom and in the entryway, so they can get a wheelchair up the ramp and in the house. We didn't build a guest room. We didn't build a bigger kitchen. They're hallways. And we knew, we spent a year working with you we understood all that stuff. So we didn't do any excavation. It's the 3 6-inch posts that are holding that bump out. The entryway is on an existing foundation. There wasn't any excavation. So, you know, my main concern was getting them there. It was not doing this. I'm sorry. I couldn't deal with that. There was just a lot going on in our lives, and I felt like it was an answer to prayer that house went up for sale right next to mine. So, you know, I'm really sorry, and I'm grateful you guys gave the variance on ours, but like I said, the circumstances at the time, this is what we had to do to get them there, and it was a rough 6 months. So, but again, I just want to reiterate that they're hallways. That's the addition. It's for wheelchairs and walkers. It's not to, I mean, we did as little as possible with no excavation, so that's all.
Okay, thank you. Anything else to add? Okay, I'm sure we'll have questions and for staff and possibly for you. So perhaps one clarification is you stated, normally we don't bring in past variances, like your variance into this, but it was brought in by you as an example of what you were trying to do. So just wanted to clarify that was November of 2021.
Yes, November
not
20.
Just last year's November, but so
no, and we were going to build by May 30th. That's when we were starting
May
the
30th
construction.
of 2022?
Yes.
Okay, and now it's
'Cause it was
2023, a year later. Okay, so you had a whole building season to work on your variance, correct? Work on
Well,
the
no.
addition.
No, we needed someplace to be.
Well, I'm just talking about your variance.
yeah, no, we
November of 2021 is when you received the variance. Yep, okay.
Right.
Just clarified that. Also, then, a couple of questions for Amy. Now, I don't know that we know exactly what the property looked like before the addition was on, but what could have been permitted there over the counter if they would have come into the office and asked? Could a ramp have been added? Could remodeling have been done? What kind of things would be allowed with just an over-the-counter permit?
Well, without a permit, an entrance ramp could be constructed.
Oh, without a
And
permit.
interior remodel and reworking of the interior could have been done without any permitting at all.
Okay,
Any physical expansion of the footprint of that would need a variance because the home is within the bluff and within the setback to the lake.
but would also need a permit, even if they didn't need a variance?
Yes, it would need a
Anybody would have
variance,
needed-
and it would need a variance, and then it would need the permitting, yes.
But anybody expanding their house needs a permit, correct?
Correct, yes,
Okay, but a ramp could have been added and interior could have been redesigned
correct.
to meet their needs, okay, without any permitting. What is the fee for a variance permit? Just a normal variance?
For a variance hearing,
A variance hearing, yes. Not an after the fact, but
it's 600,
600? And an after the fact is?
850.
Okay. All right, just wanted that clarified. Okay, those were my upfront questions before we start going over specifics. Who would like to start? Anybody? John?
Mr. Chair, to address the applicants. So you had the variance granted on your property
Yes.
for them,
Right.
and now we want another variance for them on a different property.
Right.
So we're looking at approving 2 variances, or we already have one approved on a different property. So do you still need the variance on your property?
Well, I would like to get a garage. I mean, that was part of it too, was the variance. There was the living space for them, but we're also gonna add a garage for us because we don't have.
And you need a variance for the garage too?
Because it would have been like 10 feet into the 30-foot restricted area.
Before
other
we go
thing-
down this road any further on the variance, on their variance,
Yep.
that's, Amy, would you suggest these questions are pertinent?
Well, John, I'm guessing you have a point, so.
Okay,
So when we look at going through this, the circumstances and the conditions are obviously not ideal, and I'm sorry for that. It's the how you got there, because it puts this entire board here in a very tough position to say, well, they granted us a variance for these applicants, especially when people understand this and know this, and then we bought the house next to us, did construction, went in for an after the fact for the same people on a different property, and if you say, if there are no votes up here, then all of a sudden it puts you in a tough position. If there are yes votes, then what's the rest of the county think about the behaviors that we're creating with the ordinances that we have in place? That's the hard part for us. So it's just not, nobody's winning here in any way, shape, or form. And I wanted to get that out there for the record as my number one point, but
You did ask me, though, if we
go
would
ahead.
need
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Are you finished?
yeah, go ahead.
You had asked me.
Yeah, address
if
me
we-
if you have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
He had asked if,
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, we'll just practice a little bit. You could address me, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, proceed.
He had asked if we would still need the district. I would still like to do it because I don't know how long even they can be next door. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, going back to your variance, this board granted your variance based on, the property, not on your personal needs.
Right.
It's always variances are always granted to the property, just like you heard in the prelude to the meeting tonight that I went through that. It's not to the applicant, it's to the property. So going down the trail of, your variance, it's pertinent to this because you brought it into discussion yourself in the materials you supplied and in the DRT meeting. But at the same time, it was granted to your property and you have the right to use it. And that's the same thing we're up against tonight, is considering their variance request based on the property, not on their personal needs. So however you use your variance, I guess, is within the bounds of that variance and the conditions that were placed on it, but it was granted to your property. And it will be inherited by landowners down the road, the next owners, as will your property. So, John, did you have more on that, or are you finished for now? Or?
I'm finished for now, thank you, sir.
Okay. All right, with that in mind, any other questions?
Can I just say,
Wait a second, board questions?
Mr. Chair,
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
so we heard a response from Mark Anderson, the Minnesota DNR. Didn't hear anything from Shannon Westing from Soil and Water. I don't remember reading anything in there, but Soil and Water, and we're very protective about the bluff. As I've stated at other meetings, our water is our greatest natural resource, I believe, here. And trying to keep these lakes clean and pure and everything else is huge. When you work in the bluff zone, do things in the bluff zone, you could create problems for many years to come. But my question was, any remarks from Shannon at all, then that's my only question at this time.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Amy.
Shannon Wetstein, the director of the Soil and Water Conservation District, sat in on the development review team meeting and participated in that, and was also given notice of this meeting and received the full packet. I did not receive any comment from her, though, however.
My response, Mr. Chair, would be she's probably feeling like the rest of us, and I've shared with you my wife with her handicap issues. You empathize and you hate to put yourself and be the bad person. And as John stated we're stuck in a corner here. And the variance, as our chair Dave says, it goes to the land, not the person. I'm just reiterating that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Amy, just a little review of how this property got to be where it is today. Lots of nonconformities. When they purchased it, it was nonconforming but compliant.
It was a legal nonconformity.
Legal nonconformity.
Correct.
Okay.
Did not conform with today's standards, but was legal to be there.
So a house in the bluff, too close to the lake. Obviously, things done between the house and the shoreline. You know, there's a building down at the shoreline. There's a big landing. There's all kinds of things that happened. Were those before there was a variant, or before there was ordinance that controlled them? Did they just come in, somebody built it and got by with it? Or how do these properties get to be so non-conforming?
Well, the home was built in the 70s prior to bluff standards. And so that's the explanation for why that house is where it is. The appearance of the shed along the shoreline and everything else, I can't speak to that. I don't know. I don't have permitting activity or history for that, so.
And there's no permitting for any of the stairway and
No.
landings and, okay. The only permitting you have is the garage?
Correct.
Okay, which is an over-the-counter
compliant,
permit?
yes.
It's compliant, okay. I don't know if that helps. Compliant, conforming, non-conforming, they're all terms we're used to, but seldom does anybody else think about them. But so, anybody else on the board?
Mr. Chair, Amy, can you pull up the photos of the setback in the bluff? I think there was one showing both.
The highlighted.
Yeah, it was multicolored, I think,
this one?
that one, yep. And so everything is within the bluff setback, the house,
Yes.
except the garage. The garage is outside of that.
Correct. The garage is within the building envelope. That meets all setbacks.
Okay, and then the next photo I wanted you to pull up was the actual building envelope slide.
Okay, one moment.
And so the garage is
Within the building envelope.
half of it is within the building envelope,
Those
roughly?
those are my measurements from the Beacon website, so would never substitute it for a survey, but
Sure,
those are
understood.
yeah.
And so there's 10,135 square feet of potential building envelope
Correct.
on that lot, but further back, away from the bluff, away from where the current structure sits.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So none of the addition that is on request tonight is within that building envelope, is that correct?
No, it's not.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So first of all, I feel for what you guys are going through. I think every one of us will probably go through it sometime in our life, well, unfortunately. Dave probably would be quicker than the rest of us, but
I have a motorcycle accident or something.
But so you bought this place really fast, and you know all these things. So when you bought it, did you know that you had to do these things? Evidently, you know you'd probably have to put a doorway in. But when you bought it, did you think that you would have to add on and do all
No,
them things?
no, that
Okay.
didn't even,
In fact,
Go ahead.
I was
Yes.
just gonna say, in fact, I didn't know.
Would you pull up the microphone and get a little closer, otherwise we won't be able to hear you? Get really close.
In fact, I think we had signed the papers and everything, and it was 2-3 weeks later that I stood in there and said, well, we'll never get a wheelchair in here.
Yep.
And none of us realized how tiny that bedroom was and the entrance to get in. It was so small that I could touch the entrance to the basement, and it had no door on it, and it actually scared me when I walked in because I was afraid of falling down because it was right there. So none of us realized. I didn't even see it before we bought it, you know, and Dad didn't see it at all
Yep.
either. So, no, we weren't aware that we were going to have to do anything. But I wanted to make a point about the land itself. We didn't dig anything. We don't have a basement under there. We didn't dig really. Those 3 posts is it, and I don't see where that's disturbing the land in any way, shape, or form in my mind, but I might be wrong. I don't know. I just wanted to put my 2 cents in.
Mr. Chair, I have one more.
Yep.
Mr. Chair, I would just like to
Hold
add-
on a second. Clint has the floor,
Wait,
and then you can have a turn.
So if this variance were to go through, do you have any thoughts or ideas on how you would divert the water away? You give any thoughts? You know, Marvin had a kind of a, you know, he has a concern with the water. You know, that is a pretty steep drop behind that house. Have you had any thoughts on, if you want to answer it, go ahead, whoever.
I don't know if you remember what the variance that was given for our place. It slopes back away from the lake. Anything that would come off of what the existing or the addition of 4 feet for the bedroom, that would go away from the lake,
To the road.
goes to the
Yep.
road.
But would you consider, you know, the house slopes 2 ways, so would you consider putting gutters on?
There is gutters.
There is on the lake side, and then that goes to the non-lake side?
No, that goes to the lake side,
Okay, so
on
then
the lake side.
we'd probably want that to be diverted, if it could, that to be diverted to the non-lake side.
Yeah, it could, because it slopes right to almost to the back of the house. It starts to slope towards the road.
Okay. I think that's all I have right now, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Anybody else on the board? Are we ready for public input?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Slavic had a
Oh,
question.
yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just can't help but add, and I realize what you're saying in terms of it goes to the property and not to the
owner.
personal issues, but I hated the place when I first saw it, and it was terrible. And I couldn't understand why all my money's being blown on this deal. But at any rate, as of right now, it is really great. I got plenty of room. It's very nice, and I'm very happy with it. I felt like I had to say that.
Okay. We appreciate that. Thank you. Are we ready for public input? Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that would care to make a statement on this, for or against? If so, the microphone over at the lectern is available. I'll ask 3 times, and then we'll close the public input. Is there anybody that wants to say anything for or against? One more time. Anybody out in the audience wishing to say anything? If not, we will close the meeting to public input.
Mr. Chairman,
I think we're done, unless you've got something very new to add.
I just wanted to apologize for putting you in this position.
Okay,
That's all I was going to do.
thank you. Yep. Yes, and we are in a position that we don't care to be in, and neither do you. You know, I have to refer to your attachment B. When I was looking through, you know, your answers to your questions, there's 2 sets of questions. One that would be, you know, the 6 criteria questions, and then the after-the-fact questions. You stated in one of your questions that attachment B had the answers to why you did what you did. Okay? So if we go to attachment B and we go down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th paragraph, You state in here, we knew that the house at 33,863 would need some modifications to make it handicap accessible and livable for our age and needs. We also knew that Jim and Linda had spent a year going through the process to get their variance application approved. However, we did not have time, and we believed that since we were only adding 72 square feet of space on an existing foundation and not disturbing the ground, we could proceed with the modifications and deal with the permit later. You knew what you were doing. That's what attachment B states. And that's what you basically stated out at the viewing on Friday. You also stated out at the viewing that you had a house. The house you were living in was in Sauk Rapids? Rogers, okay. It was handicap accessible, all handicap outfitted throughout, so it met all of your needs. Okay. So you knew what you needed, and clearly this house was not going to provide that. Okay.
We didn't.
And at the same time, you didn't have the foresight to go to land services, even though there's a history in the family of dealing with land services and knowing how those dealings should go. You did not ask what your options were. And clearly you had some options, and I still think you have options, interior design changes and a ramp that you wouldn't have even needed a permit for. So, and that is important in how we answer particularly question number 5, which is because of your actions or somebody else's actions. We go through this with other folks that are just asking for variances, not even after the fact variances, but variances. They buy a property that doesn't meet their needs, they know it doesn't meet their needs, and then they come looking for a variance. And sometimes we grant variances, sometimes we don't. The ordinance states that we should be trying to reduce the number of nonconformities in the county, even to the point of eliminating all nonconformities, which is an impossible dream. I mean, if you could wipe the slate clean, start all over again, everybody meet all the setbacks, and that'd be a perfect world. But we do have variance requests, and we grant some of them. The latest ones that have been granted, all of them, the new construction has been in the building envelope. Okay, you understand that?
No.
Not the building itself, the original building was non-conforming, but at least where they were adding on met the 75-foot setback to the lake, or met 30 feet out of the bluff, or whatever. It was met the county ordinance guidelines. Okay. And again, they were fairly small requests, but in the building envelope. So with that in mind, I think I just wanted to review that so that we're kind of all on the same page here. And I think we can proceed to the questions unless there's something else somebody wants to add before we do that. Okay, so we have these 6 questions to answer, and we're answering them as if this was just a variance request, not an after the fact. Okay, what would we have done? Okay. So the applicant is the applicant proposing to use the property in a, okay, I'm sorry, I started the wrong one. I'll give my paper, then my bifocals work better. Is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Let's start out with Marv. If you would you please start, Marv?
Okay, I don't believe it is. A couple of comments, what we discussed earlier. Variances are to the land, not the landowner. We've discussed it over and over. Building in the bluff in the shore impact zone is not aligned with county ordinance. And you want to make it, I deal with all these handicap issues myself on a daily basis. But you had an opportunity to check with land services what would work, what wouldn't work. in allowing this, and what you're asking for is not part of the county ordinance and comp plan, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Any other input on question number 1?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Clint.
You can look at this one both ways. I agree with what Marv said, but if you'd want to say that it is in harmony, when you look at, it's only 97 square feet, that's really small. As far as what it's going to do for impact, it's going to be very minimal, and I think if we'd condition to get water directed away from the lake, that would help mitigate that. But I totally agree with what Marv says also, so it just depends on what side you want to look at on that question. Yes, the ordinance doesn't allow for that, but there's a variance process, so that's what you're here for. That's part of the ordinance process. When we look at the impact that it makes, it is very small. If we can mitigate it some way, then maybe you can answer yes to number 1. But also Marv has a very good point.
Thank you, Clint. Anybody else like to add to that? I'd like, Amy, if you could go to the staff report and show the applicable comprehensive land use plan goals and objectives that are listed there. Okay. These are what Marv was referring to: natural resources and open spaces, shoreline development, surface water goal, land use and development goals. Now, if we look at goal D1 under shoreline development, work to ensure that development occurring within the county's watershed is done in a thoughtful and deliberate manner as to balance environmental, social, economic, and to the greatest extent possible. Thoughtful and deliberate. That's why what we're kind of all about here. After the fact lends to obviously not being well thought out, perhaps being deliberate, but not in a way that is in conforming with this goal. Deliberate meaning we do this in a methodical way. We go through this and review it in a methodical way, and that it balances, all of these needs. So we're starting off on the wrong foot. It was not done in a thoughtful and deliberate manner. But then if we go to the sonar attachment, is that figure 8? Okay, the statement or the starred section on in your staff report. Statement in the item C regarding bluff impact zone is needed to ensure that structures or accessory facilities are not placed within the bluff impact zone. It is reasonable to exclude stairways and landings from this provision, since stairways and landings are facilities needed to achieve access up and down the steeply inclined areas included within bluff areas. Exclusion of all other structures and facilities from the bluff impact zone is necessary because of the accelerated amount of erosion that often accompanies development here, and because these areas are typically unsuited to development by nature of their steepness, soil types, and so on. So there is a reasoning behind our bluff impact zone ordinance, behind the bluff ordinance, the setback to the lake. It's deliberate and it's considered, and we go through this process every time on lakeshore property. Okay, so sonar is a statement of need and reasonableness. Okay, and that helps guide us on. Okay, so with that in mind, is it in harmony? The request in harmony, it's small, not a big impact. Was it done in a thoughtful and deliberate way? No. Does it meet the sonar recommendations? No. Does it meet our objectives and goals of ordinance? No. Do we sometimes give relief to this? Yes. Anybody else on number 1?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Can you go back to the comprehensive plan points there quickly? So if I got this right, we're saying, you were mentioning, Mr. Chair, that it wasn't. Now, Clint when you were referencing it, you were talking about conditioning to goal D1, is that right? And if we go back to the picture of the actual structure, it looks like the roof is actually sending everything back behind the house. There isn't anything that's shedding forward, but we're taking advantage of this with a condition to say anything in the front of the house now needs to come back. If I got that right? So we're conditioning one of the comprehensive plans, and then on the first one there, you were referencing that it wasn't. We weren't in harmony, or with the DNR letter too.
Question for me or Clint?
I'm working through this.
Okay.
Whoever wants to take it, but
Pick one and let's
go ahead,
from there.
Dave.
What was your question?
So you're saying we can condition our way to meet that part of the comprehensive plan?
Clint mentioned a condition, I did not.
Okay.
I just mentioned what was in the ordinance and what sonar says about the ordinance and why it's there.
Right, and
That's all I stated.
And one more thing, Mr. Chair. So if there wasn't anything in the sonar report for this around what's been actually moved on this house, or what's been moved from a foundation perspective, or what's been added, what's been shifted, because it's obviously out there, was this just general language out of the DNR report?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, help me out, Amy.
When the DNR shoreland rules were written, that statement of need and reasonableness went through every part of that and stated the need for that requirement or standard. So that bluff standard, so really what we're part of this request is for expansion of a non-conforming structure within a bluff.
Right.
So when you're looking at the bluff standard, then you're looking at why do we have a bluff standard? And that sonar explains the reason why that bluff standard is there. So
Right.
It is not specific to this piece of property. It is talking about bluff, statewide shoreland standards and bluff standards and what the rationale is for requiring setbacks from them.
Right, okay. And I'm trying to take, Mr. Chair, I'm looking at this saying, if this is the statement, and we're trying to make sure that this piece of property with this after-the-fact variance is either enhancing, improving the situation on this property, or it's not, as you're literally looking at the picture, everything's being sent behind the structure. And there isn't anything that's technically, from a ground perspective, that's impacting the shoreline. If I'm looking at this as objectively as I humanly possibly can at this point.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, go ahead, Amy.
I believe Clint was essentially giving a reason to answer this question in the yes. And what he was saying is you can overcome or mitigate the impact of this by that roof that heads straight to the lake and the guttering that's on that is directed to the lake, that could be mitigated by directing that water away from the lake instead. Mr. Stish was giving a reason to answer no. And he was saying that because this request is in conflict with the purposes and intent of the ordinance, which is referenced by the sonar and then also the comp plan. So you're answering it two different ways. One saying, yes, it meets it if it was conditioned, and he's saying, no, it doesn't meet it because it's in conflict. So they're two different answers. They're building the record for two different answers.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
But good question, John, now that I
Thank you.
understand it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Clint.
Another thing is I'm looking at this application as it's not happened yet. Dave's maybe looking at it that it's already there. I think the second half of this is to come. So when I'm answering these questions, I'm acting like that ain't built yet. And Dave's maybe putting in a little bit that it's with your comment of the after the fact. That's the second part, I believe. That's
you're
my
right.
belief, but
Okay.
that's how I'm looking at it. So if that helps you.
Thank you.
No, I guess There is the after-the-fact part of this, and but this is what I would be saying, even if it was not after the fact, is that all of this is within, the setback to the lake, within the bluff impact zone, all of it. By expanding in those areas that are, through Sonar has stated, are very, sensitive areas to the environment, and our goals are to protect natural resources and environment, and to do that in a thoughtful and a deliberate way. This addition just intensifies the use of this property. It's small. How much does it increase the intensity? That's for everybody on the board here to decide. In my opinion, any intensification of the use, I don't think in recent history we've okayed anything that is entirely outside, out of the building envelope, entirely within setbacks. And in this case, there's three of them: bluff impact, bluff, and shoreline. Any intensification of use within this area is a negative impact on our natural resources, has a negative impact on the lake, has a negative impact on everybody that uses our natural resources. Small, maybe. But how did we get here today with this non-conforming property, with all of those non-conformities, by not addressing the facts?
Mr. Chair, are we ready for question number 2?
I'm not. Yes,
I think
am.
everyone else is.
Okay. Thank you for your input on question number 1. Is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Brent?
I think they're proposing to use it reasonable as a cabin and as a home to meet their needs. The addition that they're looking to put on, if we're looking at it having this not been done yet, is 72 square feet with limited impact to the ground with a pier and post, foundation. Obviously, it's not permitted by the land use ordinance. It's within the setback, it's within the bluff, and it's within the bluff setback, which, it's obviously not permitted by the ordinance. So I think what they're proposing is reasonable, but certainly it is not permitted by the ordinance.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else on question number 2?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I would just maybe kind of agree with what Brett said, but what I'd add to it is, it's such a small impact. I think with conditioning, possibly routing the water, that would help mitigate some of that ordinance that we're looking at. It's such a small area, small square footage that's added to it. Yes, we're definitely worried about the resource. By putting the additions on, there wouldn't be no excavation. I think we wouldn't have to worry about erosion. We're just worried more about the water. And I think if we can condition that, we can maybe get around that part of the ordinance, possibly.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Anybody else? Okay, if nothing else, we'll proceed on to question number 3. Will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? I get to start on that one. The applicant stated that everybody else already has what they are wanting, and they're all within the bluff and bluff impact zone. It's looking at the neighboring properties on Beacon. We can look at size and approximate location of dwellings and things, and how, to a certain extent, how built up the shoreline is. But every piece of property is unique and different. By looking at Beacon, I noticed that the Dahlheimers have the largest property there. Everybody else has about a 75-foot wide lot, like you do. Fairly deep lots that have large building envelopes, but they're stuck with old structures that have been there for a long time that are non-conforming today. So all are probably in need of variance. But I can't say that for sure. I mean, some of them look like they're probably out of the bluff impact zone. They're close, but they're probably out of the bluff impact zone. So hard to say that your neighbors have all have what you want. Each one is unique and each have to be considered separately. So I'd just like to add that in because you mentioned it. Essential character, from a glance from the lake, well, the essential character already has a huge landing and stairway system and property that's very close, and probably similar down the shore. Is that the character we want? That's the character we've got. I'm not sure how to answer this question. Hopefully, some of these guys come up with some better reasons. Anybody else on question number 3?
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, John.
When you look at what the additions are, the additions that are on, or if you were answering this from a before the fact, the additions that would be going on, it fits the character of the entire neighborhood. Every one of those houses, not every one of those houses, most of those houses are built right on the bluff, obviously for the view and for everybody has their stairway down to their dock, and it looks like every other house that's up there. So when it comes to character of that specific location, it's on point.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you, John. Okay, number 4, is alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property. Clint?
The alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the applicants is unique, with their health and all that stuff. Yes, I would say that. But when we go to the property, I don't know if I can come up with a practical difficulty to go unique to the property. Like I said, it's a small, they're proposing a very small square footage additions. But I don't know, I just haven't come up with a unique, I'd just say no, there is no unique practical difficulty to this property. Maybe more to the applicants than the property.
Okay, thank you, Clint. Anybody like to add to that? Okay. Number 5. Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? John, you can start this, please.
It's going to sound like I'm voting and I'm not voting, but the answer to that question is no. This was the landowners that created the after-the-fact variance. That's just how it is. That's why we're here.
Okay. Anybody else like to add to that? I think we need a little more than that. I guess the applicant, through their own application, stated that they were aware of the uniqueness of the property they were about to buy. They knew that it would need permitting and a variance. But they went ahead with it anyway. I know those are after-the-fact thoughts, but those are the same thoughts they went ahead and bought the property, knowing that it did not meet their needs. Those are the same things we would have said to anybody, even if it was not an after-the-fact, if they were just asking for a variance. Why did you buy a property that did not meet your needs? And then now you're asking us for a variance, and you haven't proven any practical difficulty. It's really questionable whether what you're asking for can be mitigated by conditions. Nothing you're asking for is within in the building envelope. So, that would be my answer to number 5. Anybody else? Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Marvin, your turn again.
I believe it is. They talked about different methods, how they can go ahead, care for their parents, make it usable, and to put this addition on, being the most respectful to the bluff, not burrowing into the bluff, just putting sonic tubes and putting posts over the top. So they've been doing things to the least impact to the bluff. So it's much more than economic considerations here.
Okay, anybody else like to add to that?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Brent.
The only thing I'd add to this is, you know, if we can't come up with an alleged practical difficulty to number 4, question number 6 asks the question, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? So I still don't know that we've found an alleged practical difficulty. I would just restate that here for number 6.
Okay, that's a good point. I think we're supposed to answer this question on the practical difficulty that they've stated, which is basically their personal needs. So that is the alleged practical difficulty, whether we accept that as a practical difficulty or not. Does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than economic considerations? We know a lot about this, much more than we would know in a before the fact. I mean, in a normal variance, we wouldn't know all these things, but we do know them, and it sure seems that all came down to money. This was cheaper than adding on to the Dahlheimer's house. It was close and convenient. I think it was all about money. We can't consider personal needs. It was about that too, of course. Okay, are any other answers to or input on question number 6?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
I agree with somewhat what you say, but it's not just about the money. I mean, when we look at questions 1, 2, and 3, when we look through that, it's such, like I said before, it's such a small imprint, and they're just trying to use something. If anything, it isn't just about the money. They're trying to do the smallest imprint they could. So I would say that it's just more about making the smallest imprint they could to get the most use out of the property. So I would say it is more than just economics.
Okay. Thank you, Clint.
Mr. Chair, and
Go ahead, John.
as I reference back to your comment about it being cheaper, I can't imagine it's cheaper to buy a house on Lake Chaminade than it is to actually build your own structure with the materials and the way construction works. And even if you were contracting that out, having just gone through this, there's just absolutely no way. But for the record, and I'm with Clint on that. You're talking about physical conditions that are at play here. They're not economic considerations for this alleged variance.
Okay, thank you, John. Anybody else? Okay, are we ready to vote on the criteria questions? I'll take that as a yes, that we're ready to vote. Okay, first question is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? Marvin?
No.
Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Marvin?
Yes.
Number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Myself, the answer is yes. Clint?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Marvin?
Yes.
And Brent?
Yes.
Number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Clint?
No.
John?
No.
Marvin?
No.
Brent?
No.
And myself is no. Number 5, is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners? John?
No.
Marvin?
No.
Brent?
No.
Myself is no. Clint?
No.
Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Marvin?
Yes.
Brent?
I'm going to say no.
Okay. Myself is no. Clint?
Yes.
And John?
Yes.
Okay, we have question number 1 was answered no. Question number 2 was answered yes. 3 was answered yes. 4 was answered no. Number 5 was answered no. And number 6 was answered yes. Is that correct? That's what your record says? Okay, more than, yeah. Even if one question is answered negatively, there must be a motion to deny. Is there a motion to deny this request for the after-the-fact variance? I'll make that motion. Is there a second?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I regretfully will have to second that.
Okay.
It's hard
Well-
to do this, but I have to.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Is there, okay, the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, we'll proceed to vote. All in favor of the motion to deny, say aye. All opposed, say nay. And I'll do a roll call vote. Marvin?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
Myself is aye. Clint?
Aye.
And John?
Nay.
Okay, motion carries. Your after-the-fact variance has been denied. You can talk with Land Services about what happens next.
Can I, Mr. Chairman, can I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
You talk about the finances. This has cost us a great deal more than if we'd have just been able to wait. But when we were making decisions, we didn't know if he was going to live or die, and we were dealing with doctors and hospitals, and we didn't. This was on the back burner. We were just trying to get close to them, just trying to be.
Yeah.
And economically, it was probably the worst thing we could have done. We now have a mortgage we didn't have before, and it's costing us a lot of money for this. But it's done.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that, and
I don't
yeah, we all
understand
have
that.
compassion for your circumstances. It's just,
No, you don't.
these are just the facts still.
You have no idea.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Get in touch with Amy or somebody at Land Services.
So,
Okay, next on the agenda. Minutes of the previous meeting. Did, Marv, you usually scrutinize those pretty well.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, I'd second that. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Minutes approved as presented. Okay, new business,
I don't have any new business, Mr. Chair.
old business.
None of that either.
Okay.
Chair,
7:07.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
I'll second that motion. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, meeting's adjourned at 7:07.